Welcome to the channel. Today we've got something incredible for you. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Greyhaven Isle, shrouded in mist, where the cliffs hide secrets no one dares to uncover. Last night a scream echoed through the storm, and a hidden map has been discovered, leading to a mystery that could unravel a family's darkest secrets. Only one woman can piece it all together. Miss Marple. Chapter 1. The Invitation. The morning at St. Mary Mead was calm, the kind of gentle quiet where the ticking of a clock and the rustle of leaves outside could be heard as if magnified. In her small yet neat sitting room, Miss Marple sat knitting by the window, her eyes half on her work and half on the garden, where the sparrows were busy with their endless chatter. Life, to the casual eye, seemed uneventful. Yet Miss Marple often reminded herself that beneath the calmest surface, mysteries sometimes stirred. It was then that the postman's knock came at the door. Miss Marple rose, her joints moving with the careful grace of habit, and accepted the single envelope placed delicately in her hand. She noticed at once that it was not an ordinary letter. The paper was thick, cream-coloured, and carried a faint scent of lavender. The handwriting was bold, deliberate, the kind of script belonging to someone accustomed to authority. She placed the letter upon her small writing desk, adjusted her spectacles, and opened it with her silver letter opener. The words inside were simple, but carried an undercurrent of urgency. My dear Miss Marple, I write to you with a matter of great importance. A weekend gathering has been arranged at my estate upon Greyhaven Isle. Your presence would be of immense comfort to me, as certain difficulties have arisen within my family. You will find the island tranquil, though I fear tranquility hides much unrest. Yours sincerely, Sir Henry Grey. Miss Marple read the letter twice. Greyhaven Isle, she knew the name, a solitary estate upon a small isle not far from the coast, cut off by tides and only reachable by a modest ferry. Rumours had long whispered about the Greys, old family feuds, unexplained absences, and most of all, the matter of inheritance. Yet what intrigued Miss Marple most was not the grandeur of the name, but the tone of the words. Tranquil, though I fear tranquility hides much unrest. She leaned back in her chair, fingers lightly tapping the armrest. To the untrained mind it was nothing more than an invitation. But to Miss Marple, the choice of words revealed a mind unsettled, perhaps even afraid. A matter of great importance in a family often meant only one thing: secrets threatening to surface. Outside, the late afternoon sun began to cast golden light across the garden. Miss Marple folded the letter carefully, her mind already turning like the cogs of a clock. She thought of Sir Henry, whom she had met once at a garden fete years ago, a tall, dignified man with a face that revealed little, yet eyes that betrayed unease when pressed with questions. As she set the letter down, she whispered softly, almost to herself, Greyhaven Isle. Yes, I think it will be quite interesting. There was no hesitation in her decision. The next morning she would travel to the coast, take the ferry, and step into whatever puzzle awaited her on that misty isle. For Miss Marple knew, well, behind every locked door, behind every polite smile lay a truth. And it was often the smallest details, the kind others overlooked, that opened the way. And so the stage was quietly set, a secluded island, a troubled family, and Miss Marple, knitting needles ready, eyes sharper than anyone could guess. Chapter 2. The Voyage. Across the following morning dawned soft and silver, the sky washed in pale mist as if the world itself were holding its breath. Miss Marple, wrapped warmly in her travelling cloak, made her way toward the small harbour where the ferry to Greyhaven Isle waited. The sea lay calm, yet there was a quiet heaviness in the air. the kind that precedes discovery. The boat was modest, painted in fading white, with ropes neatly coiled upon its deck. The ferryman, a weathered man with eyes like polished stones, tipped his cap politely as Miss Marple stepped aboard. "Greyhaven Isle, ma'am?" he asked, his voice low, almost reluctant. "Yes," Miss Marple replied with her gentle smile. "I am expected." The ferryman said no more, but his silence spoke volumes. He busied himself with the ropes, and soon the little vessel pushed away from the shore, cutting across the glass-like surface of the water. As the boat glided forward, Miss Marple sat quietly, her gloved hands folded in her lap. She watched the coastline of the mainland shrink behind her, swallowed slowly by the fog, until only the sea and sky remained. The gulls wheeled overhead, their cries echoing faintly, while the steady splash of oars and the faint creak of timber gave rhythm to the journey. Greyhaven Isle began to appear ahead, a dark outline against the shifting veil of mist. At first glance it seemed picturesque, almost peaceful. Tall pines along the shoreline, cliffs rising like silent guardians, and in the distance the silhouette of Greyhaven House perched proudly above the rocks. Yet the closer they drew, the more Miss Marple's discerning eyes noticed. The windows of the great house glimmered faintly, but there was no warmth in the sight. The air around the island felt colder, as though the mist itself lingered heavier upon it. The sea, though calm, slapped against the rocks with a sound that was almost mournful. The ferryman broke his silence at last. "Strange things, folk say, happen on that isle," he muttered, half to himself. "Lights burning where no lamps should be, voices on the cliffs when the tide is high. The Greys have always had secrets." Miss Marple turned her head slightly, her expression mild, almost grandmotherly. "Secrets," she echoed softly, "have a habit of finding their way to the surface." The ferryman gave her a quick glance, then returned to his oars. The rest of the journey passed in silence, the kind of silence that seems to deepen every small sound. The splash of water, the cry of a distant seabird, the faint hiss of waves sliding across the rocks. At last, the boat bumped gently against the island's wooden jetty. The ferryman steadied the vessel as Miss Marple rose, her movements unhurried, graceful in their quiet way. She stepped ashore, her small figure dwarfed by the towering cliffs and the brooding house above. She paused for a moment, taking in the scene with her sharp, knowing eyes. The air smelled faintly of salt and seaweed, and the cry of gulls seemed sharper here. The path leading upward toward Greyhaven House was narrow and winding, disappearing into the trees. Miss Marple tightened her grip on her walking stick and allowed herself the faintest of smiles. The stage was prepared. The puzzle awaited. She began her ascent, step by careful step, as the mist closed softly behind her, sealing her within the island's embrace. Chapter 3. The Household. The path that wound upward from the jetty was steep, flanked on either side by pine trees whose branches whispered faintly in the morning breeze. Miss Marple climbed at a steady, unhurried pace, her eyes noting the smallest details. The dampness on the stones, the way the path had been walked often, and the faint mark of a carriage wheel long faded into the mud. At the crest of the hill, Greyhaven House stood in solemn grandeur. Its stone walls, weathered by salt winds and centuries of storms, gave an impression of strength, yet the dark shutters and ivy-clad corners suggested secrets kept too long. It was not an unwelcoming house, but neither was it warm. It watched its visitors rather than embraced them. The great wooden door opened as Miss Marple approached. Standing in the threshold was Mrs. Finch, the housekeeper, tall, austere, her face lined and her eyes sharp as if no movement in the house ever escaped her. She greeted Miss Marple with a curt nod. "Sir Henry is expecting you, madam." Please, this way inside. The air was cool, scented faintly of polish and old wood. Portraits of Greys long dead stared down from the walls, their painted eyes following every step. Miss Marple walked with quiet dignity, her small figure moving through the vast hallway with surprising presence. In the drawing room, the family awaited. Sir Henry Grey sat by the fire, though the day was not particularly cold. His hair was silver, his frame still proud, though his hands trembled faintly as they rested on the arms of his chair. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, lingered on Miss Marple with something between relief and caution. "My dear Miss Marple," he said warmly, though the warmth seemed forced, "how good of you to come. You'll forgive the haste of my invitation, but, well, circumstances demand clarity." Beside him stood Lady Agatha, his sister, tall and severe, her gaze as piercing as a blade. She inclined her head to Miss Marple, but the gesture was more formality than welcome. On the other side of the room lounged Charles, the nephew. He was a man in his early 30s, restless, his fingers drumming lightly on the arm of the sofa. His smile was charming, but it never reached his eyes. Miss Marple noticed the faint impatience in his movements, as though he found family matters tiresome yet profitable enough to endure. Then, quietly in the corner, almost as if she wished to be unnoticed, sat Margaret, Sir Henry's daughter. Pale, slender, with eyes that held an almost constant worry, she seemed to shrink into her chair. Her fingers twisted a handkerchief nervously, and every time her father spoke, she glanced at him quickly, then away, as though some unspoken fear kept her silent. Miss Marple inclined her head to each of them in turn, her smile kind yet unreadable. She took a seat where she could see all their faces at once. "It is most kind of you to have me," she said softly, her voice soothing, yet her mind already working like clockwork. Every look, every hesitation, every faint tremor of tone. She filed them away carefully, the way a gardener marks where the roots lie hidden. As tea was served, the conversation remained polite, but beneath it, Miss Marple sensed the undercurrent of tension. The inheritance was mentioned briefly, as if in passing, but the sudden stiffening of Lady Agatha's shoulders and the quick glance exchanged between Charles and Margaret told her that the subject was far from simple. And then, as the fire crackled in the hearth and shadows lengthened upon the walls, Sir Henry said something that Miss Marple would later remember with great clarity. "This house, Miss Marple, holds more than memories. It holds truths long buried, and I fear that unless they are uncovered, they may yet destroy us all." The words fell heavily into the room, and for a moment no one spoke. Only the sound of the fire and the distant cry of gulls broke the silence. Miss Marple, her knitting folded neatly in her lap, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She had stepped fully into the heart of the household, and the puzzle of Greyhaven Isle had truly begun. Chapter 4. The Uneasy Supper. The evening descended upon Greyhaven Isle with a quiet weight. Mist crept inland from the sea, curling around the edges of the tall pines, and the waves struck the cliffs in a rhythm that sounded almost like a warning. Inside Greyhaven House, the lamps glowed softly, their golden light pooling against the dark oak-panelled walls. The long dining table had been carefully laid, silverware polished to a gleam, crystal glasses catching the flicker of candlelight. A vase of pale roses, already beginning to droop, stood at its centre, their faint scent barely disguising the aroma of roasted game and herbs drifting in from the kitchen. Miss Marple was seated at Sir Henry's right, a position of honour, though she seemed the smallest presence in the vast hall. Her eyes, kind yet watchful, moved gently from one face to another, noting every subtle gesture. Sir Henry himself sat tall, though fatigue lingered in his features. He lifted his glass with a hand that trembled ever so slightly, his voice carrying the forced cheer of a man striving to hold a family together. "To new beginnings," he said quietly, "and to old bonds that must never be broken." Lady Agatha's eyes narrowed faintly at the toast. She sipped her wine with a kind of rigid dignity, her lips tightening as though she would have chosen different words. Charles, lounging as if the dinner were an inconvenience, clinked his glass carelessly, his gaze darting to the door of the adjoining library more than once. Margaret, seated near the shadows, barely touched her plate. Each time the conversation edged toward family matters, her hands fidgeted with her napkin, her eyes lowered as if fearing they might betray too much. The meal itself was plentiful: soup, venison, fresh bread. But the atmosphere at the table was starved of warmth. Conversations flickered and died like weak flames. Lady Agatha spoke sharply about the estate's finances, her words clipped and cold. Charles countered with careless remarks about modernizing the property, his tone light but carrying an edge of impatience. Margaret attempted once timidly to interject, but fell silent when her aunt's stern gaze silenced her. Through it all, Miss Marple ate quietly, her manner calm, her eyes serene, as though she was simply a guest enjoying supper. Yet within her mind, she noted the smallest of details. The way Sir Henry avoided speaking directly to Lady Agatha, the faint twitch of Charles's mouth when inheritance was mentioned, and the quick flash of fear in Margaret's eyes each time her father coughed. When the main course had been cleared, Sir Henry leaned back, his face shadowed by the flicker of the candles. "Tomorrow," he began, his voice slow, "I shall speak with you all regarding the future of Greyhaven Isle." The words dropped into the room like a stone into still water, rippling through each face. Lady Agatha's hand clenched briefly around her wine glass. Charles's eyes lit with sudden interest, though he tried to mask it with a careless smirk. Margaret looked stricken, her lips parting as though to protest, but no sound came forth. Only Miss Marple remained outwardly unaffected, though inwardly she marked the shift. Something tied to the estate, perhaps to secrets buried in its walls, was about to be revealed. And if she had learned one truth in her quiet years of solving puzzles, it was this: revelations seldom come without consequence. As the servants cleared the final dishes, a silence lingered. The flickering flames of the candles seemed to bend and lean, as if listening. Outside, the wind rose, rattling faintly at the shutters. And somewhere in the house, Miss Marple's keen ear caught the sound of a door closing softly. A door not belonging to the dining room. It was a sound so slight that no one else noticed, but she tucked it away in her memory. Another small piece of a puzzle not yet laid out. Supper ended politely, as tradition demanded, but beneath the civility, Miss Marple knew well. The family of Greyhaven Isle sat at a table not only of food, but of secrets, and the unease that clung to the air would soon become something darker. Chapter 5. The first clue. The storm that had whispered around the island during supper broke with sudden ferocity in the night. Wind howled through the chimneys, rattling shutters and sending the old timbers of Greyhaven House groaning in protest. Rain lashed against the windows in sheets, while distant thunder rolled like some ancient voice across the sea. Miss Marple, ever a light sleeper, lay awake in her guest chamber, listening. To most ears the storm would have drowned all else. Yet hers was an ear trained by years of gentle observation. Between the gusts and cracks of thunder, she caught something curious. The faint echo of hurried footsteps in the corridor, followed by the soft thud of a door being closed. She did not rise, but her mind, sharp as any detective's, tucked the sound away as a detail of importance. By morning the storm had passed. The air smelled of damp wood and salt, and mist still clung to the pines. The house was quieter than usual, but not the restful quiet of peace. It was the taut silence that precedes revelation. It was Mrs. Finch, the housekeeper, who broke it. Her voice, sharper than usual, called down the hallway, "Sir Henry! Sir Henry!" Within moments, the household gathered outside the locked library door. Lady Agatha's face was pale but composed. Charles looked irritated at the interruption of his morning routine, and Margaret seemed on the verge of tears. Miss Marple, calm as always, stood a little apart, her eyes fixed on the door. The library was locked from the inside. After several unanswered knocks, Charles forced the door open with his shoulder. The sight within caused Margaret to give a small cry. Sir Henry lay slumped beside his great oak desk. He was not dead. His chest rose and fell faintly, but he was unconscious, his face drained of colour. Near his hand lay a broken glass and a candlestick, toppled as though in a struggle. More curious still was a wooden cabinet against the wall, its lock splintered. Papers were strewn across the carpet, and at the centre of them lay a sheet of old parchment, torn and partly smudged with ink. Miss Marple bent carefully to examine it, her hands light, her eyes sharp. Though many of the markings were faded, she could make out lines and curves, the rough shape of the island itself. A cross, faint but deliberate, was marked upon the cliffs at the northern edge. It was no ordinary family document. It was a map. Charles stepped forward quickly, his eyes flashing. "What on earth is this doing here?" he demanded, his voice more defensive than curious. Lady Agatha pursed her lips tightly, offering no comment. Margaret knelt by her father's side, clutching his hand with trembling fingers. Miss Marple's gaze drifted toward the window. Though it was latched, the sill was damp, as if opened during the storm. On the carpet she noticed a faint trail of seaweed, trampled underfoot. Her eyes softened, though her thoughts grew sharper. Seaweed in a locked library? That was no accident of nature. Gently she touched the candlestick, noting how it had rolled just far enough to suggest movement, not merely a fall. Her mind assembled the pieces quietly, without judgment. The footsteps she had heard in the night, the broken cabinet, the parchment map, the damp traces from the sea. "Most curious," she murmured softly, almost to herself. The doctor was summoned, and Sir Henry was carried upstairs to rest. The others drifted from the room, their faces clouded by worry and suspicion. But Miss Marple lingered, her small frame alone in the vast library. She stood for a long moment before the scattered papers, her eyes fixed on the cross inked upon the cliffs. The first clue had been placed upon the board of this puzzle, and though the picture was far from complete, Miss Marple knew she had already seen the threads that would, in time, reveal the whole design. With quiet dignity, she turned from the room. The storm had passed, but inside Greyhaven House, darker storms were gathering. Chapter 6. Whispers on the Isle. The storm had washed Greyhaven Isle clean, but it left behind an atmosphere more restless than refreshed. The pines dripped with rain, gulls wheeled low over the cliffs, and the sea rolled against the rocks with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Within the house, however, the air was heavy with unease. Sir Henry slept fitfully under the doctor's care, and the rest of the household moved like shadows, each with too much to think and too much to hide. Miss Marple, after a simple breakfast of tea and toast, slipped quietly into the gardens. Her manner was unassuming, as though she were merely admiring the roses or watching the dew dry from the hedges. Yet her mind was as sharp as a needle, turning over the clues she had gathered. A locked library, a broken cabinet, a parchment map marked with a cross upon the cliffs, seaweed where no seaweed should be. She found the young maid, Ellen, by the side path, hanging damp linens on the line. The girl startled at Miss Marple's gentle approach, but a kind smile soon coaxed her into calmness. "It was a terrible night, wasn't it?" Miss Marple said softly, handing the girl a fallen peg. "Storms often unsettle people. Did you rest at all?" Ellen hesitated, her fingers fumbling with the sheet. Not much, Mum. I heard things. I shouldn't say it, but it wasn't only the storm." Miss Marple tilted her head, her knitting bag swinging lightly at her side. "Oh? And what did you hear, child?" The maid's eyes darted toward the direction of the cliffs. Voices. Near the boathouse. Low voices, whispering, like someone arguing but not wanting to be heard. And later, footsteps in the corridor upstairs. I was too afraid to look. Miss Marple's eyes softened, though inwardly her mind sharpened another point upon her puzzle. "You did quite right, my dear. Often the wise course is to stay still and listen." Leaving the maid, she strolled down toward the shore path. The air was cool and briny, the rocks still slick from rain. She stooped once, very slowly, to examine the damp sand. There, impressed faintly but unmistakably, were footprints, broad, deliberate, and leading toward the boathouse. The sea had begun to wash them away, but Miss Marple's eye was not so easily deceived. Later that morning in the drawing-room, Charles appeared, yawning extravagantly, as though he had spent the night in deep, peaceful slumber. His boots, however, betrayed him. Miss Marple noted the faint crust of sand clinging to the leather. She said nothing, only commented mildly on the beauty of the sea air and how it must be invigorating for walks at dawn. Charles gave a quick, sharp look before laughing it off. Margaret, meanwhile, avoided her gaze altogether. Her pale hands trembled whenever her father's condition was mentioned. More than once, Miss Marple caught her glancing toward the sea. Her eyes filled not only with worry, but with something that looked remarkably like fear. By midday, Miss Marple had pieced together enough fragments to see the outline of a picture. Voices in the night, footsteps where none should be, footprints leading to the boathouse, shoes carrying the sand of the shore into the house. Yet whose voices? And what was so precious about a torn parchment map that it warranted such secrecy? As she returned to the library, empty now but for its scattered papers and silent bookshelves, she whispered to herself, "Secrets rarely remain secrets on an island. The tide has a way of washing things ashore." Her eyes drifted once more to the parchment map, its faded ink showing the shape of Greyhaven Isle. The red cross on the cliff seemed to grow brighter in her imagination, like a beacon. And Miss Marple knew with quiet certainty, whatever lay hidden at those cliffs was at the very heart of the puzzle. Chapter 7. The Puzzle of the Parchment. The afternoon sunlight fell in long golden bars through the tall windows of the library, illuminating the dust motes that floated lazily in the air. Greyhaven House was unusually silent, as if the very walls were listening. Miss Marple, seated in a straight-backed chair near the desk where the torn parchment had been discovered, unfolded her knitting calmly. But her thoughts were far from the pattern of her yarn. She had asked politely to see the parchment again, and after some hesitation, Lady Agatha produced it from the cabinet. With gloved fingers, Miss Marple spread the fragile sheet upon the desk. The faded ink revealed the outline of the island, but it was the small crimson cross that drew the eye, placed firmly upon the northern cliffs. "An old family chart," Lady Agatha said dismissively, though her lips tightened as she spoke. "A relic of no importance." Miss Marple's eyes, mild and blue, lifted to her face. "Oh, but relics often carry the weight of truth, don't they?" Sometimes more than the present wishes to admit. Lady Agatha made no reply. Instead, she rose stiffly and left the room, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Left alone, Miss Marple leaned closer to the parchment. She traced the faint lines with her gaze, noting how the curves of the coast were marked with unusual precision, as though drawn by one who had studied the island carefully. The cross itself was heavy with ink, darker than the rest, added later perhaps, when something needed to be hidden or remembered. Her reflections were interrupted by Charles, who strode into the room with careless energy. "Still studying that nonsense, Miss Marple?" he asked with a smirk. "My uncle's fancies, old maps and childish treasures. I dare say he enjoys the drama of it all." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "You have little patience for puzzles, I think, Mr. Charles. Yet sometimes childish treasures are the hardest to part with." Charles laughed lightly, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. He glanced once at the parchment before excusing himself, muttering something about fresh air and horses. Not long after, Margaret entered quietly. She carried with her a tray of tea, her hands trembling slightly as she set it down. Her eyes fell upon the parchment, and at once her face paled. "You've found it," she whispered, almost too softly to hear. Miss Marple looked up gently. "It seems to trouble you, my dear." "Why is that?" Margaret shook her head quickly. I cannot speak of it. Only, it would be better if it were left forgotten." And with that, she turned swiftly, leaving the room before another word could be drawn from her. Miss Marple sat very still, her knitting untouched, her mind weaving threads far more intricate than yarn. A map hidden, a family divided, footsteps at night, whispers by the boathouse, seaweed upon the library floor. And now this. Fear in the daughter's eyes, denial in the aunt's voice, and restless greed in the nephew's manner. She folded the parchment carefully and returned it to the desk. Then, speaking to herself in a voice as gentle as a lullaby, she said, "Clues are like stitches in a pattern. Tiny, easily overlooked, but together they form a whole. And this pattern, I fear, is leading us to the cliffs." The evening light dimmed slowly, and the call of gulls echoed faintly through the open window. Somewhere beyond the misty pines, the northern cliffs waited, their secrets pressed deep in rock and salt. And Miss Marple, serene yet unwavering, knew that the puzzle of the parchment was the turning key to the hidden truth of Greyhaven Isle. Chapter 8. The Midnight Discovery. The night settled heavily upon Greyhaven Isle, shrouding the estate in a cloak of mist and silence. Only the distant, steady rhythm of the tide breaking against the rocks gave voice to the darkness. Within Greyhaven House the lamps were dimmed, the corridors hushed. Yet Miss Marple, though resting in her chamber, had no intention of sleep, not when the puzzle of the parchment remained unresolved. It was close to midnight when she noticed it, a faint glow passing beneath her door. She rose quietly, wrapped her shawl about her shoulders, and peered into the hallway. Down the corridor, moving cautiously, was the flicker of lantern light. It vanished toward the side entrance that led to the cliffs. Miss Marple, with the patience of a hunter and the softness of a shadow, followed. Her small steps made no sound on the carpeted halls, and soon she found herself outside, the cool air sharp with brine. Mist clung low to the ground, swirling around her ankles as she made her way toward the northern cliffs. The lantern ahead bobbed in the darkness, its glow just enough to guide her without betraying her presence. The path twisted through the pines, then opened suddenly upon the rugged cliff edge. There, crouched against the rocks, was Charles. His face was tense, his hands working feverishly at a stone crevice. He had wedged a crowbar between two slabs of rock, grunting softly as he pried them apart. Beside him rested the torn parchment, weighted by a stone, its crimson cross a beacon to his efforts. Miss Marple's eyes, calm and unblinking, observed. She did not step forward, not yet. Instead, she stood within the mist, her form almost blending with the shadows. At last, with a low crack, the rocks shifted, and from the hollow Charles dragged forth a small iron-bound chest. His breath came quick, his eyes gleaming with triumph. He fumbled with the latch, his impatience betraying him. When it snapped open, he pulled back the lid eagerly, only for his expression to fall. The chest contained no gold, no jewels, no glittering fortune. Instead, it held bundles of old letters, their paper yellowed and edges frayed. Charles rifled through them with growing frustration, muttering curses under his breath. "You see, Charles," came a voice, sharp and cold, "treasure is not always what one expects." Lady Agatha emerged from the mist, her figure upright and unyielding, her eyes blazing in the lantern light. She stood like a judge before a guilty man, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "You thought to take what is not yours," she continued icily. "Always so greedy, so rash. You would bring ruin upon us all." Charles rose to his feet, anger flashing across his face. "And you would hoard it, would you? Hide the truth forever? Well, perhaps I have as much right to it as you." Their voices carried on the sea air, sharp as the gulls' cries overhead. Miss Marple listened, still unseen, her mind carefully gathering each word, each tone, as though they were pieces of a puzzle. The chest, the letters, the quarrel, each pointed not to riches, but to secrets buried for decades. Before their argument could turn to violence, the lantern flickered low. A gust of wind swept across the cliffs, carrying with it the sound of the restless sea below. The waves crashed like a warning, echoing into the night. It was then that Miss Marple chose to step forward, her voice gentle, yet steady. "Secrets, my dears, have a way of drawing out the worst in people, and if one is not careful, they may also lead to the edge of a cliff." Startled, both Charles and Lady Agatha turned to her. In the lantern's glow, she appeared small and frail, her shawl wrapped close about her, but her eyes shone with calm authority. Neither spoke, but the tension in the air crackled like lightning before a storm. The chest remained open between them, the faded letters within fluttering slightly in the sea breeze. Miss Marple regarded them both with quiet composure. The midnight discovery had not yielded treasure, but it had revealed far more valuable clues. And though neither Charles nor Lady Agatha yet understood, the path to truth was now unfolding, step by inevitable step. Chapter 9. The Gentle Unmasking. The following morning broke cool and pale, the sky washed in a thin veil of mist that clung stubbornly to the edges of Greyhaven Isle. The sea had calmed, but the household remained unsettled. Servants moved quietly through the halls, their eyes lowered, as though the very stones of Greyhaven House carried secrets too heavy to bear. Miss Marple, however, was composed as ever. She had spent the night not in restless sleep, but in thoughtful reflection, knitting needles clicking softly as the storm of clues arranged themselves into a pattern. Now, with daylight filtering gently through the windows, she knew it was time to place the pieces before the family. Sir Henry, though still pale and weakened, had regained enough strength to sit in his armchair by the drawing-room fire. Lady Agatha stood stiffly near the window, her hands clasped tightly together. Charles slouched against the mantel, attempting nonchalance, though his eyes betrayed unease. Margaret sat low in her chair, her face pale, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief into knots. It was into this charged silence that Miss Marple spoke, her voice soft but carrying, like the steady toll of a bell. "My dear friends, I fear last night's events have left you troubled. But puzzles, you know, are not so fearsome once their pieces are gently laid in order. Let us, if you will allow, put them together." The room seemed to tighten with her words, Charles scoffed faintly but said nothing. Lady Agatha's eyes flashed, though she held her tongue. Miss Marple folded her hands neatly in her lap. "We have, first, the matter of Sir Henry, struck down in his library. At first glance it appeared an accident. Yet there was the broken cabinet, the scattered papers, and most telling, the seaweed upon the carpet. An odd thing to find in a locked library, unless the intruder came in damp from the shore." Her gaze moved slowly, first to Charles, then to Lady Agatha. Charles shifted uncomfortably, but Miss Marple continued gently. "Then the parchment. A map of the island, with a cross upon the northern cliffs. We now know that the chest it led to contained not riches, but letters. Letters which some in this house might have wished to keep hidden. Letters that told a truth about family ties that had been concealed for far too long." At this, Lady Agatha's lips pressed into a hard line. Miss Marple's eyes softened. "Lady Agatha, it was you who feared those letters most. You who crept into the library that stormy night. Your cloak brushed the seaweed by the boathouse. Your hands bore the smell of the tide. You meant to destroy the parchment before Sir Henry could reveal what it contained. And when he surprised you, you struck him down, not to kill, but to silence." A sharp intake of breath broke the stillness. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Charles muttered under his breath, though whether it was disbelief or triumph, none could tell. Lady Agatha straightened, her voice low, trembling with something between anger and despair. "And what would you have had me do, Miss Marple? Let the world see the truth, that I am no rightful Grey at all, that I was born of shame, and that every comfort I have known was borrowed, not earned. You call it secrecy, I call it survival." For a moment, no one spoke. The fire crackled softly, and the gulls cried beyond the mist-shrouded windows. Miss Marple regarded her with the compassion of one who understood human frailty. "My dear lady, I make no judgments. But secrets once buried rarely remain so. They have a way of rising, like the tide itself, and it is better, I think, to face them than to let them destroy those we love." Sir Henry's weak voice broke in, laden with sorrow. "Agatha, I never meant to cast you aside. The letters were not a weapon, but a means of acknowledgement. I wished at last to set matters right." Lady Agatha's composure faltered. Her shoulders sagged, her hands trembled. She turned her face away, unable to meet her brother's eyes. Miss Marple leaned back in her chair, her tone soothing once more. "And so the puzzle unravels not to reveal gold or jewels, but something more precious, the truth. Painful, yes, but truth, once spoken, may heal what silence has long wounded." The room exhaled at last, though the air still carried heaviness. The unmasking had been done, but gently, with neither cruelty nor triumph. Miss Marple had laid the pieces together, and in their arrangement, the family saw not condemnation, but a path forward. And in her quiet heart she knew another puzzle had yielded its secret to patience, kindness, and the steady observation of human nature. Chapter 10. The Hidden Truth. Morning came softly to Greyhaven Isle, the mist parting at last to reveal a sky streaked with pale gold. The storm of secrets had broken, but its echo lingered in the walls of Greyhaven House. The family gathered once more in the drawing-room, their faces drawn with the weight of what had passed. Sir Henry, though weak, insisted on being present. He sat in his high-backed chair, a wool blanket over his knees, his gaze steady, though touched with sadness. Lady Agatha remained near the window, her figure still proud but her eyes hollow, as though the strength that had held her upright for years had suddenly drained away. Charles paced restlessly, hands in his pockets, his sharp movements betraying the turmoil beneath his charm. Margaret sat quietly beside her father, her hand upon his, the faintest spark of hope glimmering in her expression now that truth had finally been spoken aloud. Miss Marple sat calmly at the centre of it all, her knitting resting in her lap, her presence as steady and soothing as a lighthouse in fog. Her voice, when she spoke, was gentle, yet it carried the clarity of final judgment. "My dear Sir Henry, my dear Lady Agatha, and all of you, what has been uncovered is not a tale of treasure but of truth. The chest on the cliffs contained no gold, no jewels, but letters. Letters that revealed, Lady Agatha, the story you have borne in silence all these years. Not a shame, though you feared it so, but a truth that bound you more tightly to this family than even bloodlines can." Lady Agatha turned, her lips trembling though she spoke with difficulty. "I believed that to reveal myself would be to destroy all that remained to me. I sought only to preserve what dignity I had." Miss Marple inclined her head. "And yet dignity, dear lady, does not come from secrets. It comes from the strength to stand in the light, however unforgiving. You feared exposure, but Sir Henry sought only acknowledgement, a way to heal the silence that has divided you both." At this, Sir Henry's voice, though weak, grew firm. "Agatha, you are my sister in every way that matters. No letter, no circumstance of birth can alter that. Had you trusted me, you would have seen that I meant not disgrace, but recognition." For the first time in many years, Lady Agatha's composure cracked, her proud shoulders shook, and she turned away, unwilling for the others to see the tears that had risen unbidden. Charles, restless still, laughed bitterly. So all this fuss, all this plotting, for nothing more than faded letters and family pride. No fortune, no inheritance worth having, only secrets. Miss Marple's eyes found his, calm yet piercing. "On the contrary, Mr. Charles, riches fade, but secrets corrode. It is better for them to be revealed than to fester. You would do well to remember that." His smirk faltered, and for once Charles fell silent. Margaret, her voice soft but clear, leaned toward her aunt. "We are still family, Aunt Agatha. If you had only trusted us." Her words hung in the air like a gentle plea, and for the first time, Lady Agatha's eyes softened toward the young girl. The fire crackled, the house creaked with the wind, but the silence now was different. It was not the silence of fear, but of release. Miss Marple rose slowly, gathering her shawl about her shoulders. "I believe my part here is done. The truth is seldom easy, but it is always kinder than the silence of lies. You have your path now, each of you. Walk it with honesty, and perhaps peace will return to this house." She took her leave with quiet dignity, her small figure moving through the great halls as if she carried no weight at all. Outside, the mist was lifting, and the sea shimmered beneath the morning sun. The ferry awaited at the jetty, and as she stepped aboard, Miss Marple looked back once at the looming silhouette of Greyhaven House. A puzzle had been set before her, tangled in secrecy and silence, and now it lay unravelled. The isle, with its cliffs and whispers, would keep its mysteries no longer. As the boat carried her back across the calm waters, Miss Marple folded her hands, her mind already turning to the simple peace of St. Mary Mead. Another puzzle solved, another family set gently back upon its course. And in her heart she knew, as surely as the tide returned to the shore, that truth, however painful, was the only treasure worth finding.